Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space, where I take stories from across the internet and read them for your entertainment. Now, the like button has been suffering from insomnia. He needs a little pat on the head to help him calm down so he can sleep. So, if you don't mind tapping that like button and helping the little bugger get some sleep. Also, if you do enjoy my content and you're not already, if possible, could you please subscribe? And drop a sleep emote down below in the description. Anyways, onto the story. Humanity's enigmatic claim by going over that cliff. To His Holiness, the High Priest, the seal must be exclusively opened in his presence and with his direct approval. Praise thy Lord. As requested by his sanctity, the following is a shortened and edited account of the short report issued to the Grand Council of Priests by me, a mere envoy sent to investigate the latest stellar claim by the astral domain of mankind, colloquially known as humans. I humbly thought it appropriate to provide additional context regarding the reason for my dispatch. As His Holiness will surely know, when an empire lays claim to something, be it a single celestial body or a specific space sector, said claim needs to be approved by the galactic community before being officially recognized. This procedure allows other eligible parties, usually neighboring powers, to file counterclaims if they are also interested in obtaining the objects of the original demand. When Earth requested full custody of the small exoplanet R1P32MH, no one objected to it initially, but during a meeting of the Grand Council, someone questioned humanity's true intention when acquiring such an insignificant planet, which happened to be halfway from ours and their respective spheres of influence. Given the yearly claim limit allocated to each empire by the terms of the Galactic Power Index, the Terran's choice to request control of R1P32MH, which will be referred to as R1P for practical reasons, was a complete mystery to us, as there are many more valuable assets that remain unclaimed on the star map. R1P does not hold the fuel of a gas giant. It does not contain the resources of a dense iron moon, and it certainly does not have the aesthetic beauty and desirability of many other planets. The air is barely breathable for both our people, and is too exposed and impractical to serve as a military outpost, let alone a trading post, as the lack of a strong magnetic field makes it vulnerable to severe cosmic radiation, frequent in the sector, and the atmosphere is too thin to stop most meteorites, whose craters litter the surface. The original report provides a more detailed list of unfavorable characteristics. After 3 days of closed-door consultation, the Grand Council agreed to send me, the Archbishop of Lenya, to investigate if the mysterious planet could hold any worth to us and to uncover any potential scheme by the untrusty humans. Before setting off, I activated my vast network of contacts and informants and discovered something quite noteworthy. As your sanctity will surely remember, 7 years ago, a severe rebellion, mainly composed of dissidents and disgruntled settlers, was violently quelled by the iron fist of Earth's governmental forces. Or so they led us to believe. That is not entirely true. The rebel forces adopted a guerrilla warfare approach, extensively prolonging the conflict. Although hostilities significantly quieted after the famous battle years ago, the last embers of resistance were extinguished just a month ago with the fall of R1P, as that exoplanet apparently served as the last stronghold of the insurgent forces. With this knowledge in mind, I ordered my crew to set coordinates for this enigmatic lone wanderer of a planet. During the short jump, I mentally and physically prepared to interact with humans. As soon as we exited hyperspace, just outside the planet's pool, we had to immediately throw our gravitational anchors to halt our momentum, as all around us a seemingly unending number of wrecks were floating lifelessly in the cold void. Having spent plenty of time alongside the Navy of Sol, I recognized some of those lightless hunks of steel, either by crest or by hull shapes. One in particular stood out to me, catching my attention. On a fragment of a composite hull, barely visible, obscured by numerous debris and blackened by marks of explosions, one could read G-223. She was a supercarrier from the 7th Grand Fleet. Over 35,000 personnel are required to crew a ship of her class. I witnessed her in action during the war against the Union, credited for 192 kills and over 400 assists. Her presence alone was enough to spread fear and panic in her enemies' ranks. But looking around, one would see a few hundred meters ahead of us the deformed frames of ships clearly not of military origin. Those were the rebel starcrafts, repurposed civilian vessels for the most, but among them one could spot the odd captured Navy vessel, repainted and renamed. All around us a thick, dreadful, macabre cloud of shipwrecks surrounded the planet, shrouding it like an artificial asteroid field, only composed of thousands of mingled and carbonized hulls, all of which were once vessels that served humanity in one way or another. They now only serve as grim steel caskets, with side panels punctured by railguns and latches ripped off by fission torpedoes. Hundreds of thousands of craft of all shapes and sizes were left slowly drifting, powerless and aimlessly orbiting the forsaken corner of the universe, to be swept from bow to stern by cold solar winds and heavy gravitational waves. As a sort of tasteless cosmic jest, or maybe a dreadful omen to carefree visitors, the majority of these carcasses of steel were concentrated along the equatorial line. Shortly after our arrival, the light from the distant parent yet uncaring star shone through the empty void of space, reflecting on the metallic surfaces of the starship's remains, creating a beautiful yet twisted game of lights. From afar, one would think that this planet of death was crowned not by an ordinary ring of natural origins, but by a holy halo whose brightness was a sum of those darkest entities imaginable. The reverberating voice of space traffic control shouting through the speakers shook me from my deep thoughts. After moving to the instructed coordinates, 2 tugboats towed us through a safe corridor towards the exoplanet. As my ship remained in upper atmosphere, I boarded a shuttle and headed for the surface, where a human official was waiting for me. During the short flight, looking out of the small window of my craft, I witnessed the full extent and magnitude of the scars left by human warfare on the celestial body. The fighting was so ferocious that topographic maps must have been redrawn constantly, as mountain ranges were flattened and new crevices appeared after the dust settled, where intricate layers of trenches once stood. As we flew past the boundary between 2 continental plates, I observed that, in certain places, even the bedrock had been turned inside out. The violent shaking and rearrangement of the tectonic plates had caused a significant height difference of up to hundreds of meters between the two. For example, one settlement, or military outpost, was situated in the middle of a crack and, as a result, was split in 2. As my shuttle touched down on the last remaining stronghold of the planet, the situation surrounding me appeared bleak. Besides most buildings being turned to dust and rubble, the atmosphere had a spectacular quality that I find hard to describe. Constantly shrouded by an eerie and unsettling fog, the command center was perched on top of what I can only describe as a marshy swamp under the perennial hammering of heavy rains. There, far away from the distant star's light and God's blissful touch, nowhere did I find the pride, might, and arrogance that I have always associated with humans. As I looked around, I saw soldiers slowly and hesitantly trudging forward, staggering and seemingly stumbling with every step. Their eyes were empty and fixed in a forward gaze as if searching for something in the distance. However, they couldn't seem to find anything to focus on, and the blankness of their gaze remained a disquieting constant. No words escaped their mouths, though their heads ached with screams. 1,000-yard stare is how the humans call this condition in common jargon. They use it to roughly describe the condition of some people who have seen and lived through, and I quote, too much. It was troublesome, but at least after a good half an hour of wandering around broken tents and smoldering barracks, I managed to find my human counterpart, the general. When I reached him, he was exposed to the rain, sitting on the edge of a pillbox littered with the marks of hundreds of rounds. He was silently staring at the foggy horizon, using a sandbag as a pillow. "Good evening, sir. I am the Archbishop of Lenya," I said lowly in a respectful voice as he turned around. I saw his exhausted expression, one that mirrored the void of everyone around me. "Good evening," he replied in a flat and emotionless tone. The general was a shattered man who seemed no different than the deceased except for the fact that he still had a beating heart. But even that was up for debate. I felt sorry for him, as well as for his soldiers and the entire situation. However, I had a task assigned by the council, which I was obliged to fulfill. Almost scared to ask, I announced the reason for my visit. "Why do you want this planet?" I inquired while raising my head to look at all the nothingness of the barren expanse that the space rock had to offer. The general appeared to concur with my statement as he let out a sad chuckle upon hearing my words. Then he looked at me, straight into my eyes, and spoke with a fulsome power that I believed he had lost. "Who operated that anti-air battery?" he said while pointing at a distant object, whose original shape was impossible to discern from the twisted steel burned to a crisp. I was unable to reply. "Robert was the commander who re-enlisted to spare young man's lives, not that his sacrifice changed much. Sam was the gunner who ran away from his family's farm on Mars. Too boring for him. I'm sure he had enough adrenaline during his final moments to make up for a lifetime of growing potatoes. Joe was the spotter who signed up for armed forces to pay for his sister's college. I'm sure that she'll jump for joy knowing that she won't have to pay a dime for education thanks to his service. Mark was the loader, barely 20 years old, who enlisted to impress his family and friends. I'm sure they were elated when the postman delivered an empty coffin wrapped in a blue flag with a fecking medal thrown on top by some grand marshal who would not even be bothered with taking the white gloves off." I kept silent, but the general's voice grew louder. "Who was she, turned into red mist by a 152mm artillery shell as she was running to administer aid to a comrade?" said, as he pointed to a specific crater next to the pillbox. "Who was he, killed during a rare moment of rest by a kamikaze drone?" he vigorously exclaimed, as he pointed at a black halo a few meters away. "And who was he, whose last vision before death must have been hypothermia and blood loss, laughing beside him, betting with a pair of dice over who would have the pleasure of taking him first?" Furiously shouting as he pointed at the unnamed field, off in the distance, obscured and concealed by the grim haze. Akin to a dam needing to open its gates after a flood, the man would have released a stream of tears without a doubt, if only he had any left. 28, Archbishop, 28 million men and women died on this damned rock, counting both sides. 28 million human lives, and 4 million more are reported as missing. Missing where exactly? Here, maybe there. The glorified asteroid is too small to get lost on, and where would they even go? No flora or fauna, not one civilian settlement or mining rig is left standing, and I can assure you no one will come by to rebuild them. There is nothing here." As a priest, out of habit or perhaps empathy, I extended an arm and offered my ear to console this poor soul. "Why are we even here to fight the rebels, to preserve our glorious species? They wanted to avoid taxes and do their own things. Fine, who cares? It does not matter how it all started and what they did. History will just remember them as violent terrorists, even if that is far from the truth." "History is written by the victor, after all," I replied with a sorrowful tone of understanding. "No! History is written by those who remain and rewritten by those who follow. Our struggles, pain, and losses will become mere statistics. And for what? To get yelled at once we go back home, to be hated by our people for following orders from puppets they elected." The man paused amid his emotional outburst to catch his breath and regain his composure. He held his naked head in his hands, and even though it was raining heavily, the downpour didn't let up for a moment. In fact, it seemed to intensify, as if the sky was crying along with him in response to his heartfelt words. "Where is your God, Archbishop?" he murmured like someone who had finally gone crazy. "God is in all things, but his plan is complex and unknowable, and even if he seems distant and unreachable, he always looks after all these children." Despite my good intentions, my tone and shaky voice betrayed my emotions, as I realized it must have been difficult for him to have faith in a bigger picture after witnessing what no one deserves to see. Are we also his children, Father? I believe so, yes. God manifests differently to each creature of the cosmos. He might have thousands of names and even more faces, but he remains one and only. The general finally raised his gaze to the sky, in the process cursing the heavens in the freedom of his mind. His pupils remained steady as heavy drops of rain fell upon them, and his empty eyes held firm as lightning flashed across the desolate landscape. Either we are his worst children, or he turned a blind eye to this corner of the universe. Maybe both, he uttered with a resigned sigh. I wanted to intervene and correct his twisted thought process, but I realized that, at that moment, no words would have changed his disappointed, desperate opinions. I understand how you feel, and although I am not in a position to judge you or your people, I would like to offer our assistance. It would be an honor for us to help you provide a proper burial to all the lost souls of this conflict. If you wish, we would also be happy to assist you in returning the bodies of the warriors to their rightful place. Not even the torrential downpour could conceal the sad smile that flickered across the man's face. Without averting his gaze from the dreary clouds above, he replied with resolve, There are no hidden motives or strange plans behind our request for this exoplanet. Everything here is as you see. Nothing to mine, nothing to harvest, nothing to boast about. I was about to ask for the real reason, but the general seemed to be able to read my mind. You want to know why we want R1P so badly? It's quite simple, really. Even in the darkest and most dire situations, we must not forget what makes us human. We need to hold on to our values and principles. And Iliad illustrates this point perfectly. Despite being sworn enemies, Achilles allowed Priam to bury his son, which finally brought him peace after days and nights of unending suffering and grief after the loss of his dear friend. I was confused by his reference, which seemed rooted in ancient myths and legends, but I knew better than to interrupt. In death, all of us are equal, regardless of how or why we fought. It is our utmost duty to pay tribute to those who sacrificed their lives in defense of their beliefs. We understand that it is not possible to find and bury all the bodies where they rightfully belong. However, for those who remain undiscovered, it is vital that we offer them eternal peace. While we certainly appreciate it, there is no need for your help. Once our claim is recognized by the galactic community, all our fallen will sleep easy, knowing that they are not forgotten, as they will forever rest on human soil. End of story. I would just quickly like to thank the T5 peeps: Dragon Soup, Cold War Boomerwaffen, Severin Cerberus, Red Panda 121, Leslie 517, Bushmaster 177, Caspar Arnholt, Cam Maxwell, Sans the Skeleton, Lightjock, Dragzoon WRE, and Lord Azrakal. Thank you very much.